You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, as you know, as always, we put Ghana first. Now, to talk about the economy and the mid-year review of COVID-19, the finance minister gives some optimism that things will be well, including a 3.5-year, 1 billion Ghana cedis, Ghana Cares, or what he calls the Obatampa program, to anchor the transformation of the society. But of course, that is hinged on the Akufo-Addo getting another term. A number of issues that we are looking at for you right now. So let's welcome our next guest to join us on this discussion, Dr. Festus Ebo-Teksin. He's Senior Lecturer and Coordinator of Economic Policy Management Program. That's the EPMP. Thank you very much for making time to join us, Dr. Ebo-Teksin.
Thank you, Samson, and good morning to your viewers and listeners.
Great to have you once again. Okay, so thanks to Professor Jampo and to Professor Kwesi Enin for joining us for the first segment. Kokubako insists that we should let him go home and listen to you guys. But we also insist that we want to have a perspective on some of the issues as far as the budget is concerned. So let's begin with Dr. Ebo-Teksin. When you look at the mid-year review, the finance minister is very clear in letting us know that we didn't prepare for a number of things. Of course, we all know that we didn't prepare for COVID-19. Now, he says that revenues are expected, the expected shortfall will be 13.6 million Ghana cedis. That's of the budget target for 2020. And yet, the expenditure is to increase by 11.6 million. What's
based on the expenditure and then the revenues that were projected to be collected in 2020? That was what we had for money to finance. Then the pandemic hits somewhere in January in other parts of the world, and then hits Ghana in March 2020. Now, before even the pandemic hit Ghana, I mean, the first quarter of the year, although our expenditures were almost at the projected level, our revenues had already dropped by 3.5 billion. I think coming from the fact that 5 of our major trading partners had locked down, and so international trade revenue declined. But then in the second half or the second quarter of the year, that is when the pandemic hit Ghana, and therefore with the lockdown in the Greater Accra region and the Greater Ashanti region, it meant that government revenues were going to decline substantially, and one in terms of tax revenue, and then secondly, most importantly, the loss of petroleum revenue because oil prices had declined because of the pandemic and also other issues with the supply of oil of the global oil market. And therefore, over that period of time, and up to even the end of the year, we are expecting a shortfall in government revenue, which is going to be about 3.5%. But the pandemic itself came with costs. And if you remember, as soon as the pandemic hit, the president decided that in the best interest of the country to contain the pandemic, we have to lock down. We have to come with some additional costs to the government. In the sense that households were going to be affected, businesses were going to be affected, and therefore there was a need for some government supports, given that these businesses and households pay taxes. And therefore, in times like this, you always expect the government to come up with something to help, to minimize the suffering that individuals would be taken through because of the pandemic and loss of jobs and businesses and so on and so forth. remember that they're giving 3 months free water and a subsidy of 50% for electricity. That was a huge amount of money, over $1 billion Ghana cedis. And also, in terms of taking care of the vulnerable in our society, those poor households, by giving them food, and also an increase in our expenditure in health, which we all planned for, because we had to make sure that we procure the equipment that was needed for the frontline workers. And also, government came up with some initiatives to provide incentives for those who are at the front line of helping to contain this pandemic. And all of these came with a huge expenditure outlay that was totally unplanned for. So, yes, by the second half of this year, our revenues have dipped, and then our expenditures were over the roof, unplanned for. So it's going to leave a huge financing gap for us this year. And I think that what the budget did, the review of the budget did, was to tell us how government was going to finance the huge gap, which is about 6.5% of our GDP, unplanned for. And so that is what the mid-year budget for this year sought to do, unlike previous years where the government will come and revise a few of its estimates, and then if there's a need to add some additional spending, they ask Parliament to approve of that. This year was totally different. Our finance minister had to, and the government had to rethink about how it was going to contain this pandemic, because it's going to continue for the rest of the year. I mean, even if I told you,
the minister,
if we are going to get
the minister speaks of cash basis deficit of 24.3 million Ghana cedis. Did I hear you say 4-point-something million instead of that?
No, what I did say was that the shortfall that the government needed was going to be about 6.5% of our GDP.
Okay.
And so that is what the government needed to finance in terms of how much we needed to close the financing gap. Right. And that is an extra financing gap that we closed, in addition to the 4.7% that had already been projected for 2020. So that is why our budget deficit, as we speak, has been revised to over 11%. And it's quite huge, but then given the pandemic at this moment, and given that all over the global economy, countries are having to run their budgets just to contain the pandemic, I think that Ghana is no exception. And I was excited about the content of the budget, because for me, I think that this is the time government will have to come to the aid of businesses. This is the time government will have to come to the aid of individuals, so that businesses can retain their workers, especially those that have demand for whatever they produce, and they're having challenges because of the pandemic. So that is my opening remarks that I'll have about this.
Right. Now, the minister says that the review is the first economic plan to reposition Ghana and its citizens to deal with the impact of COVID-19. Does it appear to you that, in as far as the immediate things that he intends to do are concerned, they don't seem to have much impact, except for what he's envisioning for the Ghana Cares project? That's the Obatampa project of 100 billion Ghana cedis.
Yes, I mean, obviously, we need to try as much as possible how we can minimize the negative impact of this pandemic on our economy. Even though over the last 3 to 4 years, we've done so well in trying to contain to try to build the economy back to the levels that we expect it to be. And so when things happen like this, and that was the reason why we came up with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, to ensure that we do not overspend to levels where the deficit becomes not sustainable, and then almost all the gains that we've made over the years are sacrificed. But then, given the pandemic, we need to still maintain the economy, so that in future, supposing we get over this pandemic, we are going to meet an economy that even though growth had declined substantially, has the potential to expand in the immediate future, maybe 2-3 years, so that we get back to where we were before the pandemic. So I guess that the sort of packages that the government is seeking to support businesses and individuals with over the next 6 months, the end of the year, are interventions that are supposed to keep jobs. They are interventions that are supposed to help businesses keep on producing, especially for those businesses that have demand for whatever they do. And therefore, if they are not given any financial support, they might not be able to maintain production. They will lay off their workers. Don't forget that when the workers are laid off and they go home, it's also going to be something that the government will have to care about. So keeping businesses running and so on and so forth is a good thing to do. I mean, if you take the reduction in the communication service tax, something that some of us have called for some time now, it's a good sign because, I mean, even in terms of universities and other institutions that try as much as possible within this pandemic to be able to carry on with their teaching and all of that to ensure that we come to the end of the academic year. This has to do with data, I mean, online education, all of that. So it's good that it's declined. And don't forget that these days, almost every individual has access to a mobile phone, and data and calling costs are quite huge. So if you cannot transfer money directly to them, these are the ways indirectly that you can help them out in the face of the pandemic. And also the support that is being given to small and medium enterprises is something that, like I said, is going to help to contain production as we try as much as possible to see how best we can get over this pandemic. And so, for me, I think the point that will help to sustain production.
A part of the point of the questioning I just asked you was this. The government made available $600 million to support small and medium-scale enterprises in the coronavirus alleviation program. We understand that thousands have received support in that direction. Now, the rest of the year, do you find anything specific in the budget that is a support to private enterprise? That's the engine of the economy. Other than what is projected for the next, the next regime, that is starting 2021, which is the 100 billion project.
Yes, I mean, there's a bit about government guaranteeing a scheme of $2 billion through the banks to offer very cheap credit, affordable credit to businesses to maintain their employment and to save them from collapsing. Also, don't forget that the free water that is being given for households also goes to businesses as well. I would have loved to see a situation where some subsidy to electricity would be given to businesses and not households. Why? Because for businesses, especially in the manufacturing industry that rely on electricity, part of the support that we can give them is for government to take up part of the electricity costs so that they can reduce their cost of production in the midst of the pandemic so that they can keep their workers producing. Don't forget that we are looking at the industry growth rate, which we projected to 8.6% this year, dropping to 0.8. So, I mean, it doesn't look well in terms of the growth figures, but then some of these help that government is coming up with, if it's properly targeted and businesses that offer quite a sizable amount of employment are supported, I think that indirectly it could have an impact on the negative impact on the households, especially those that lose their jobs. And especially for me, I think that we should take a second look at the services industry, which is going to grow negative 0.8, and especially for those in accommodation hospitality. Even as the demand for their services have dropped, the government can still keep them so that they don't collapse. And I think that because they play a critical role in our economy, and something you recall that services in the sector have been the main contributor to our GDP growth, and it's important that we try to maintain it at a particular level.
Right. I'll return to you on some other issues as far as the budget intended to be, the review intended to be the first economic plan to reposition Ghana and its citizens to deal with COVID-19 impact is concerned. And you mentioned also that the other things that may help business would be the electricity. Of course, for now, we know that the only benefit in electricity is for lifeline consumers. So, well, I don't know how that goes into improving businesses, but it certainly does imply some impact there. And then for water, the minister actually said this is for both domestic and commercial. I have had the water supply people come to me and say that they bring me all the bills. That's when we're supposed to get it for free. They brought me all the bills and said I'm supposed to pay. I told them I'm not supposed to pay. They insisted that a commercial use, I'm supposed to pay. I didn't want to argue, so I went ahead to pay. I think I'll be preparing to go and argue it out with them. But Dr. Theo Acheampong, the minister said something which touches your area of expertise, particularly in the energy sector. The question I have is, after spending almost 4 years, should we be hearing that refrain? He says that we spent in excess of 4.7 billion on excess capacity payments to keep the lights on. Then he says we also for obligations under questionable contractual obligations. Now, we know he has consistently said that the payments we are making for some of this excess capacity has been wrong, and that they were reviewing these contracts and so on. Must it take 4 years and so the minister comes and all he's doing is complaining to us rather than telling us the solutions that he has had to avoid making us continue to pay so much, 4.7 billion on excess capacity payments?
Interesting. Let me deal with the politics of it first, and then I'll come to the economic aspect. So clearly in that statement, there was a bit of a political jab at the NDC, although it was couched in kind of nice language, and partly because, yes, a lot of power PPAs were signed in the erstwhile administration, some of which were over what the country actually needed at the time, and actually would also need in the next 10 years. If you look at the integrated power sector supply plan, the master plan that the government has been working with over the years. So the reality is that we did sign quite a number of these take-or-pay contracts, and they were posing a lot of big fiscal challenges on the Treasury, and therefore the contracts were needed to either be renegotiated, and then some of them had to subsequently be cancelled. I know a few that have been cancelled. I know others that are also in the process of being renegotiated, all as part of the ESRP or Energy Sector Recovery Program. But clearly in that statement, there was the politics of it, and I won't mince words about it, you know, that it was a bit of a jab at the opposition. And don't forget, it's only a few months to the next election. But what I really want to do is to situate the analysis in a little bit of context. And if you would maybe give me about 5 minutes to explain this. So we all live in extraordinary times. COVID is here, and every country has been impacted one way or the other by it. And we're dealing with twin crises of our time. So first, it's a public health crisis. And then secondly, there's the follow-on economic crisis that has to be addressed. And like, governments across the globe, Ghana has come in with a number of measures, both on the fiscal and the monetary side, to attempt to stem this crisis. So my analysis of really this midterm budget is going to be focused on four main angles. For the purposes of our listeners, just a bit of context and education, and then we can look at what are the practical solutions that the government can actually implement to sustain the economy in the midterm. So the first angle to look at it is on the macro performance. The second angle would be to look at the revenue and expenditure side of the equation, where things like the energy sector recovery issues fall into, and then to look at the impact on debt management or public debt management. And then finally, what is the impact of all of this going forward on the real sector of the economy? Because we're talking about jobs, we're talking about livelihoods, and and all of these. So quickly, if you indulge me, I will just start off with the macro side and look at the indicators that we had in the 2020 budget that was read in November. The government was wanting to do 6.8% real GDP growth. By the end of this year, we're actually probably going to be doing about 1%. They were targeting an end period inflation of 8%. By March, it was 7.2 within the band. But as at June, inflation had jumped up to 11.2%. The deficit, as Dr. Texon has mentioned, was 4.7%. But as the half year, January to June, we're actually done 6.3%, and we're actually on course to be doing a little under 12% deficit by the end of the year. Of course, because of COVID and the related ancillary expenditures that have to be made. The other things about our reserves and then the policy rate, and then the stock exchange, which is another indicator of economic activity. Year to date, the stock exchange has actually declined a little, again, under 16%. So that gives us a bit of the macro picture, where we're coming from, the targets that we had set for ourselves, but because of COVID, all these targets have pretty much been dealt away with, and we need to set or reset a new target. So it is in that vein that I think that the new budget or the supplementary budget was passed. And on the revenue and expenditure side, without boring you too much about the details, the point is that there is a 26% shortfall in revenue as we speak currently. The government was actually performing by now to have actually reached a performance rate of 74%. So between 74 and 26, you can see the gap that we are looking at. And this decline in revenue even precipitated COVID. So pre-COVID, we had seen signs that we weren't doing all that great on the revenue front. And then on the expenditure side, there's been an 11.5% decline in expenditure, likewise. And this, 11.5% increase in expenditure. And this has been due to the COVID-related expenditures that have been made. But the interesting thing, or as we say, the devil is always in the details. So let's look at a bit of the details, right? On the shortfall in revenue, oil revenue has gone down 55%. Import duties comprising non-oil, non-tax revenue is down 39%. Grants and donor releases are down 56%. On the expenditure side, rather, employee compensation has gone up 13%, while other expenditure and arrears currents have gone up 140 and 86%, respectively. So what that means in totality is that we are having to deal with a much bigger deficit than we had anticipated. And the real problem is, how is the deficit going to be financed? In this particular instance, over 90% of the financing of the deficit year to date is actually been from the domestic sources. So the government has had to go borrow, supplemented by some of the treasury bills, etc., that the Bank of Ghana has sold. And that has tended to constrain, availability of credit to the real sector or the domestic sector of the economy. And it's something we have to deal with in terms of solutions going forward. And the foreign financing has just been around 10%. So with COVID, there's been a lot more portfolio outflows. People who invest in Ghanaian treasuries have moved their monies somewhere else. So that is the real underlying, I think, mechanics of where we're coming from and what we subsequently sort of need to do. But underlying all of this is what I've always said is the fiscal rigidities in Ghana's budget. So you'll be interested to know, if you go back to read budgets from Kwesi Botwe's days, from the mid-1980s as part of the structural adjustment program, right through to date, the same set of structural issues tend to, highlight or show themselves. So consistently, yes, we run deficit, but you can see our top three budget items, i.e. compensation of employees, interest payments, and grants to other sub-units, they tend to consume all of our revenues. And there's often very little left for capital expenditure or even other related spending. And those are the issues that we must deal with. If anything, what COVID has showed us is that the economy is not as robust as we would like to think. We have made some progress, but if all it takes is just one big, exogenous shock to expose the underbelly, as we say, and for us, we always keep trumpeting GDP growth, debt statistics. Yes, they're good, but it's not connected to the micro level, and they are not connected to developmental outcomes as well. So what is the way forward? And this is where I think I can, I have about 11 recommendations that, I can go into detail, but perhaps maybe Dr. Tekson would want to chip in before I come in with the way forward.
Now, before you get into the aspect of the recommendations that you want to give, the question I ask Dr. Tekson, and we want to give a bit of emphasis to that so that both individuals and managers of private, sector will begin to see and identify the relief and the rescue that comes to them in between now and elections. What do you see beyond the 600 million support to small and medium scale enterprises that we have already done? That is the coronavirus alleviation program. And then whether you think that the water and electricity will also translate into support that will get the economy back on track. But you would find that the minister himself places emphasis on what he calls the CARES, the Ghana CARES.
Obatampa project,
yes.
100 billion.
Yes, the Ghana CARES, 100 billion. And CARES represents COVID-19 alleviation and revitalization of enterprises support. Alleviation and revitalization of enterprises support, that is CARES. Is there anything substantial you see beyond the Ghana CARES or the Obatampa project? And the Obatampa project is also not for immediate.
Yeah, so the project would run up to 2023.
Right.
But if you look at the detail in the budget, they actually break it down into 2 time frames, which is what you have to do in the short term to stop the bleeding or the hemorrhage. And then once you've stabilized the situation, what do you do in a more medium to long term to get the economy back on track, and for that to deliver real outcomes in terms of growth and jobs, etc. So I think the framing or the approach is about right. I have no issues with what the government seeks to do. It is no different from what other established economies are doing now, like here in the UK, in other places in Europe where the EU has come out with a 700 billion euro, fiscal relief. That's all well and good. the devil is always in the details. And it's in the details in terms of what is the government seeks to do, what they want to spend, how they're going to raise the financing, and much more importantly for me, how we're actually tracking those outcomes. And I'm saying that because, you see, consistently, we keep throwing money after problems, but we don't really have any strong monitoring and evaluation value for money framework that allows us to say, look, we live in extraordinary times now. The financing inflows are not going to be coming in as we expected, at least for the next 3-4 years. So every dollar or every cedi that we spend must count, and it must count in terms of delivering on those efficiency, outcomes, and value for money, etc. That's where I think perhaps we should spend a bit of time really digging into some of the specificities, in terms of the detail and what the government wants to do specifically as part of this 100 billion Ghana cedi CARES program. So the program itself, yes, on the surface, all well and good. I think there are specifics the government can actually do beyond what they stated here to support industry. The CST relief, all well and good. I am particularly not personally in favor of this, free water, free electricity thing. I think we need to actually work more on the targeting. And sometimes when I throw it to my friends, they'll be like, oh, but we're all citizens anyway and everybody pays tax, so why don't we enjoy? But that sort of defies, I think, economic rationale a bit, in the sense that, we should be able to actually identify which of the citizens we really want to give these interventions to. There's a couple of things that we can actually do. Three ones I'll quickly mention. I think one, the tax exemptions regime that we have in the country needs to be fundamentally reviewed. If you look at the numbers, the tax exemptions is costing the country about 2% of GDP annually. That's as much as we get from oil revenues, on a year-to-year basis. And my solution really would be to move from this pre-tax or pre-project approval where things go to Parliament and the exemptions are given, and rather let the projects, be done and executed, and then you bring the paperwork to actually qualify for the exemption or being given the tax relief. I think on the domestic side as well, the services sector, as Dr. Sexton said, is the fulcrum of the Ghanaian economy, and that hasn't really changed. But we must do more to support the sector. So perhaps a thinking around maybe reducing the corporate tax rate as well. And the evidence shows that these sort of reductions go a long way to promote industry and create jobs. We must also align all our existing industrialization policies to the COVID recovery action. What I mean by that is, if you look at the numbers and what the government is proposing to do in terms of like the CARES program, some of the interventions, i.e. one district, one factory, one village, one dam, etc., I fundamentally think that we've got to now connect it to our industrialization policy. So one, do we want to run an export-led industrial strategy? Do we want to do a resource-driven industrial strategy? Are we looking at import substitution? And to what extent does that connect to innovation and dynamism in things like the financial services industry? These are all fundamental points that often when you look at some of the details, I think that these programs stand in isolation and they are not connected to a much, bigger pot or pie. Okay. And finally, I would think that we can also promote domestic tourism as well to support the services sector. Okay. So perhaps a cut in the VAT rate, as we've seen in the UK here, where the government is giving a tax rebate for going out to eat. Things like that can actually help support the recovery. Thank you,
Dr. Theo Champong. Hold on there. And then, Dr. Texin, and I'll come back to all of you guys, starting with Kweku, on one issue about the dry food packages and hot meals that were served and the minister announces to us that we have spent some 54 million to do that during the lockdown, when food was to be supplied to people within the lockdown areas of Accra and Kumasi. There's a lot of talk about that in town. People are very suspicious that the amounts may not add up, particularly if you consider what NADMO had said earlier, that it cost us to do, and what the gender minister has suggested must have been the cumulative figure that was spent, around 40 million, and now we are told that it's 54 million. But Dr. Texting, just a quick one to add up to what you find about the support that will go to industry, as in private sector, because the minister says this is what is needed to anchor the private sector to drive the growth that is necessary. You mentioned the support given by the banks as part of it. In the Oba Atampa project, the first phase is supposed to start in July, but the banks gave these the 7 billion support to borrowers through loan restructuring, interest rate reduction, and granting of new facilities. They did this as of June. Beyond that, what else? What else is there tangibly?
Thank you, Samson. I think that I mentioned the 2 billion guarantee scheme that the government mentioned that is going to help businesses for the next half of the year, and also in terms of support in the creative art industry, an additional top-up of the 600 million by another 100 million to give more credit to the SMEs. I mean, I would say that the 700 million is not adequate, given that we have over 300,000 small and medium enterprises. So what is important?
And the minister emphasizes that this small size, medium scale enterprises account for 70% of the private sector, you know, in the drive of the economy. Yeah.
Precisely. But I mean, given that the money is just about 700 million, I don't think that we should target almost all enterprises. For me, my focus should be on enterprises that have paid taxes in the past. Because, of course, this is money that is coming from government. We've contributed to funding government in the past. And you have a legitimate call to get some of the sources from that. So that at least that will feed into expectations about tax compliance. So that those who do not get would find it necessary to now begin to go chasing their tax identification numbers and actually pay their taxes.
Right.
They should also go to sectors that I think that have the potential to keep their workers on the job, because there's a demand for what they produce, and especially for the new opportunities that have come up in the economy, especially those that are producing the PPEs and other opportunities that have come up in terms of the digital space. Because these days, as all sort of online packages, services are coming up. And that is where the support should go, because this is the new way of doing things. And therefore, I think that if we think about expanding 700 million to almost every enterprise, that is going to be significant. It's not going to make any difference. Because if the ones that have the potential receive the support and they're able to pay back, then the money can be sent to other sectors as well as the pandemic pans out. But what for me is important is that it is the cares that we should look up to, not what is happening now. Because I think what is happening now, given the constraints that government has, is to just support businesses to keep their workers and to continue production, hoping that between the period between 2021 and 2023, that 100 billion investment will go in to support them directly. Don't forget that government is coming up with 30 billion of that money, and then the private sector will have to fund the 70 billion. And for me, what I think that has to be done immediately is to try to put in place a framework government will help us to source that revenue because it is important. Where is that money going to come from? You're already challenged in terms of revenue.
Exactly.
Where are we going to get the money from?
Exactly.
One area in which you can look at is for government to find out how best it can tap into its network to get concessional loans from our bilateral multilateral
so like you just said, you are already challenged. You are expecting a shortfall, and at the same time your expenditure is to go up. Then you are giving freebies, so to speak. There are others who say that's actually the job of government. Governments are supposed to be doing what they are doing now in COVID, which they don't do. You are doing a reduction in the communication service tax from 9 to 5% starting September of this year. And then there are actually analysts who say the extension of the free water, and more particularly the electricity, may not be a prudent thing to do. Like you said, you're already challenged. Electricity company needs the money to run, and they have bills that are not being paid. So you have already taken 1 billion, and you want to incur as much as an equivalent amount. That's not good. What do you say to that?
Something, I mean, just for the point of clarification, the Lifeline support has always been there. In the budget that the minister presented last year, there's a line item in expenditure for support to the Lifeline. Of course, not the entire amount that they spend, but there's always support for them. I think that these are vulnerable households. Those are presumably use Lifeline customers. They are people that we need to support. I mean, like you said, this is what governance is all about. I mean, in times when pandemics hit, it's the government's responsibility to go and see how best it can help minimize the negative impact on households. And I won't agree with those who say that it's not necessary to subsidize water. Why not? I mean, don't forget that water is also one of the most important things that households should have readily available to contain the infection of the COVID. Because if households do not have access to water, washing their hands at every moment and all of that is going to be a problem. So it could be an indirect solution for the public health side of the issue, but also because government cannot give direct incomes for all households like the US and other economies are able to do. So indirectly, you can reduce the cost of certain basic needs that they incur, and that cost more often than not, if it's public utilities, is something that you can use to help. And for me, I think that it's good that this is coming up. Of course, I mean, there are issues of targeting, like my colleague Dr. Acheampong said, but in an environment like us where we have not been able to even be able to rope in the households and the informal sector to collect taxes, it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to discriminate in this type of support to households. And I think that the other bit which the minister mentioned was the research that is being done now by ISA to try to identify households in very poor communities in 80 districts that will need direct income support, which I guess the COVID Secretariat is going to try to support them. So that is the only bit that you can do. But in terms of the whole economy, and don't forget that the fuel also goes to firms that are producing. Like I said, I think that for Ghana now, if we are going to sustain our economy so that we can recover as soon as possible, I think that businesses should be the focus of government attention. And I'm happy that the free water is also going to them. Like I said, I'd have wished that electricity will also go to businesses and not households, of course.
All right.
So that it will reduce their.
So on that note, we will take a break here and then return to continue the discussion. And when we return, as I hinted, we will try to see what faith all of you have in the figures that have been churned out as regards the food that was supplied to citizens during the lockdown. And we are talking about a government that says that it has spent 21.6 billion on the bank collapse situation, and then COVID-19 also comes in at the same time. How exactly is the finance minister working out all of these situations? He calls the bank collapse situation, where we have spent 21.6 billion, as legacy of financial enslavement by the previous government. And yet the government is still bold about doing the Agenda 111. That is 111 hospitals to be created. It talks about having been able to achieve, even in these circumstances, gross international reserve for 4.3 months of import cover. What's the magic in all of those developments? It talks about 1D, 1F, the 232 projects at various stages of implementation, even though 76 have been completed and are operational, and it is 154 of the 260 districts that are benefiting at this time. 11 out of 14 small earth dams for the northern, upper east, and west, as well as the savannah regions, have been done. We'll return to interrogate some of these figures shortly. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile, your most authoritative news analysis show. So for those of you who are complaining, you have sent in so many messages, we are not reading any. I'll just read two for the earlier issue, and then perhaps for the budget, I may read about two as well. So Dr. Charles Rekubrobe Tazan says that, how do we develop a professional police service when politicians openly brag about getting their supporters recruited when they are in power? Plenty talk. Hashtag Newsfile. Kweku Nchibu Esiako says, my brother, if Hawa Kumsin was not an MPP member and did what she did, the response from the authorities would have been different. All women are equal, but some are more equal than others. In Ghana, the rule of law applies to ordinary people, not the elite. Let's not beat about the bush. We get it. And even if we don't accept it, it appears we have to live with it. Sad. In other words, do you think if I did what Hawa Kumsin did, would I be sitting at home today eating Tiozafi and listening to Newsfile? Okay. Thank you for those messages. And perhaps this very final one from Natalie Jumo. Natalie Jumo is a lawyer practicing in the UK, and she says she's been listening to Kweku Baako over the period, and she thinks that maybe the legal profession should activate Section 7 of its Act and call Kweku Baako to the profession. Thank you for your wisdom that you share with us all the time. Thank you to Natalie. All right, so Kweku, now let's see if you can exercise the same level of appreciation on the budget, which you have been trying to run away from, and get a similar applause from Natalie. So about the feeding to people, the minister said we have spent 54 million. People are like, really? What is going on? Compared to what we have heard earlier up to now, do you doubt that figure? Do you have basis to doubt it?
No, I have no basis to doubt it. But I'm also not going to just give it a plus as if there's no need for some people to ask questions.
Okay.
Fortunately for us, this is just accounting. Mm-hmm. It's not an audited account yet. We haven't gone there. And they're going through the parliamentary process. This budget will be debated. Mm-hmm. All aspects of the budget will be debated on the floor of the House.
Right.
There will be opportunity for more questions to be asked relative to the 54 figure and whatever NADMO might have brought earlier. Mm. you know, they will definitely have to do the approval of an appropriation bill.
That's right.
Which goes into an act. So it's too early in the day for people to get unduly alarmed. I have no problems with those raising questions. Those questions would also be raised on the floor of the House. The minister and other ministers responsible for those things will be required to give further and better particulars. Beyond this, there will be time for auditing of those accounts will come.
Right.
So I'm not unduly worried.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Kuku, for that. Gentlemen, as to Dr. Ebotexin and Dr. Theo Acheampong, in the next 4 minutes or less, let's see, what are your views about people questioning this amount? And Theo, too, you had these 11 recommendations. I don't know how many of them you can share with us before we close. So start with you, Dr. Ebotexin.
Thank you, Samson. I think that what my senior colleague and mentor from AFOR, has said is what I also agree with. I mean, Parliament should scrutinize that amount. I think that the Auditor General also look at that amount and come up with where inefficiencies have arisen. But I think that for me, the 54 million for food, I mean, I don't know how many households were supported, but I thought that I saw something about over 400,000 households, which would bring the figure to just about 115 cedis per household. I mean, individual supported. I mean, if they were giving food over a period of time and all households got enough supply, I mean, not in terms of number, but the number of times that were promised.
Yeah, a period of 21 days.
Yeah, I don't think that if we spend 115 or 120 cedis on a particular individual, giving the package of food and uncooked food, I don't think it's out of the extraordinary. And I think that what we need to find out if it was really efficient and if the over 400,000 households or individuals got the food supplies, then we can begin to talk about issues related to whether the figure is correct or not.
Dr. Sexton, thank you so very much. We've run out of time. Yes, Dr. Theo Acheampong, what would you say briefly?
Yeah, so two quick ones. On the food issue, if you go by the 400,000 that numbers that we're talking about, really it's like 1 cedi 81 pesos per person per day. So on the surface, it doesn't really mean much, as far as I'm concerned, but that will be subject to proper scrutiny and accountability down the line. I think it's part of the politics that we tend to play in this country. More substantively, the two other quick points I would really want to add on the numbers that you mentioned, for example, on the reserves, actually, it's very simple to explain. So over the period, our export decreased by 8%. In the same time, our import bill also decreased by 7.8%. And the trade balance then recorded a little bit as a surplus. So that's why you actually see 4.3 months of import cover in June. It's just an accounting kind of,
Thank you so very much, Dr. Theo Acheampong. So unfortunate. Dr. Theo Acheampong is economist, political risk analyst, and senior fellow, Imani Africa. Dr. Festus Ebotexin is senior lecturer University of Ghana and coordinator, Economic Policy Management Program. Abdul Malik Kuku is our regular guest. He's editor-in-chief of the New Crusading Guide newspaper, editor at large. I'm Samson Ladi Anyanini. Join us again next week, God willing, and we will bring you the Airbus issue that we were unable to deal with today. Have a good afternoon.